just to give you an idea of my presentation, I have a sort of agenda. So I will first talk a bit about the chemical industry case. I will try to show you why this is an interesting case, which can give us some lessons, some ideas on how to reach the goals of sustainable development. I will talk more specifically about sustainable development and the way chemical industry can be a solution provider for these goals to be met. Then I will conclude making some consideration about the most appropriate policies to promote effectively the green transition. As Professor said, we will have at the end a Q&A session, but feel free, if something is not clear or not convincing, to interrupt me, just to have a discussion together. So let's start from the first question. So why is the chemical industry an interesting case as a study case, let's say? The first thing is that, generally speaking, people can be suspicious about the chemical industry. So we can have fears about chemical substances, about the safety of these substances. So one answer could be the way to solve the environmental problem is to reduce or to eliminate chemicals. This could seem a simple solution. So the first thing is, why cannot we just eliminate chemical products? And here, to have an example, I ask you, what are the chemical products inside a car, for example? Do you have any idea about what chemical products you find in a car and what they are used for? So if you think about that, which is an example among many others, here you have the list of all chemical products that you have for a car to work. So the first thing is that there are many products. And the second point is what they are used for. So some of them are for safety reasons. For example, here you can see that for seat belts and airbags, you use synthetic fibers and you use technical gases, which are for the airbag to become big and protect our head when we have an accident, for example. This is an example. I can make some examples on the environmental side too. For example, we have additives and catalysts which are used to reduce the polluting emissions of fuels, for example. We have plastics, and plastics have substituted many other materials for many components. That's because plastics, it's a very light material. So if the car is lighter, you will need less energy to move it. So this is another way plastics are useful. And plastics and chemical products will also be useful for the car of future, for future mobility. We are talking a lot about, for example, electrical mobility. To have electric cars, we have to develop lithium-ion batteries, and such batteries need special solvents to function. Another example is that there are some specific enzymes that can transform agricultural residues into fuels. And when we talk, for example, about self-driving cars, we will need some special paints to protect sensor for cold and dirt. So from this example, you have seen how useful has been chemical products, but our experience with the pandemic also give us another example. Here there's a list of all products which are chemical products. So, for example, to help sick people to breathe, we needed oxygen. Oxygen is a medical gas and it's a chemical product. All pharmaceutical active ingredients, reagents, all we use for diagnostics, these are all chemical products. Disinfectants, like the one you have there, is a chemical product. All individual protection devices like masks are made of plastics, again, a chemical product. So here you can see, for example, production in Italy of chemicals. And what we see is that there are so many products and that these products are very different, the one from the other. So we have cosmetics, we have crop protection products, we have plastics, varnishes. So these products are very different. They have user markets which are completely different. So their economics in some terms are different. But what is the common ground then? Why we talk about one single sector? The point is that this is the only industry that shares its name with a science. So all chemical products are based on chemistry. And chemistry is the science that studies the properties and transformation of matter and substances. So what the chemical industry does is to transform these ideas, this knowledge, these discoveries into products and into technological solutions. The other aspect of the chemical industry, the reason probably why we are not aware on how useful, how essential are chemical products, is that they are mainly intermediate goods, which means that except for example, cosmetics, detergents, all other products are not products that we directly use, but are products that are sold to other industries, other economic sectors that use them to produce final products, products for final consumption. And as you can see here, through these flows of intermediate goods, what pass through, it's also the R&D content of chemical products. And this also means that chemical industry is a sort of technology transfer industry for all other economic sectors. At the same time, the chemical industry is essential, but is also a very complex one. So what she does, she transforms raw materials, energy, it uses air, water, and this produces some potential risks. So we can use substances that we must be careful because can be risky. It consumes resources, natural resources. It has some emissions into air, into water. It produces waste. So this means that it has to be managed very carefully. And this cannot be done just with, let's say, good purposes, but with a strict management system to protect health, safety, and environment. For example, this is the sector that makes more education, training for its workers, because if you work in a chemical industry, you have to be careful to manage such substances, not to have accidents. So I would say this is an interesting case because we cannot do without chemistry. At the same time, it's a complex one, so we have to be careful to manage risks so that risk don't turn into problems, into injuries, into environmental disasters, and so on. The other point is that we said chemical industry transforms substances. A very important raw material is oil, for example. And here you can see that a single barrel of oil can be used to have a fuel, for example. At the same time, if the chemical industry transforms it, not as an energy source, but as a raw material, it obtains at the same time all the products you can see here. So from one single barrel of oil, we can have T-shirts, we can have protection tubes, detergents bottles, car components, suitcases, and so on. So we can say that this is an efficient way of using a resource, a scarce resource as oil. And the other point is that always the goal of the chemical industry is to look for ways to optimize resources and minimize waste. When we use oil only for fuel, maybe it's not a very effective use, an efficient use of oil, because we can look for another energy source that is less environmental problematic to move cars. But at the same time, this could be a very efficient use of oil to transform it in so many products. The chemical industry also uses raw materials of biological origin. So these were fossil raw materials. Now we have biological raw materials. And again, you can obtain chemical products and you can obtain biofuels. The point is that we should use biomasses with no alternative uses, because if, for example, I use a raw material that is for food to have chemical products, I will create a problem because I will subtract this raw material to food. And for example, in terms of developing countries, it could be a very big problem I create and not a solution. So the new frontier is to try use biomasses that have no alternative uses. So for example, food waste, or for example, algae, or other biotechnological products. It's very important to know that only the so-called life cycle analysis can identify the best solution in terms of environmental impact. So not always raw materials of a biological origin are better in terms of environmental impact compared to, let's say, traditional raw materials. What a life cycle analysis do is to quantify resources that we need to use, all the phases of manufacturing. So for example, one case was with palm oil. In the food industry, at a certain point, there was, I would say, some greenwashing saying, we do not use palm oil because it's bad. It's not bad in itself. At first, it was good because it was a natural raw material instead of a non-natural raw material. So all the food companies substituted other oils or other synthetic things with palm oil. Then there was the awareness that actually in the developing countries, they were destroying forestries just to have palm oil to use for the food industry. And so a life cycle analysis would tell us, no, this is not sustainable because you are destroying other resources. The other point is that we cannot consider only the manufacturing. We have to consider all the life cycle, which means also the distribution, the transport. We have to how we use it, how long we use it, for example, and how can we manage the end of life. Please, if you have questions, comments, feel free. So another point is that, of course, the chemical industry is an industry. So in Italy, for example, we are the third European producer with 51 billion euros of production value. More than half of our production is exported. And in Italy, we have close to 9,000 R&D personnel. This also gives us another important feature of this industry. It's an industry that needs highly qualified people. And to be highly qualified, people are paid more. And actually, the wages in this sector are 40% higher than the national average because we have more productivity, and so you can give higher wages to people. And 95% of employees have a permanent contract. So also the problem sometimes we hear about, let's say, instability of working situation is not a problem in this sector. So in these terms, we can say that for a country like Italy, which is an advanced country, a rich country, probably this is a sector we can that can give good conditions also for people, let's say. Its role is also that it's a strategic supplier for all the typical Made in Italy sectors. Here you have a list of the so-called Italian districts, which are very specific areas where we are specialized in very specific products that are exported all over the world. And actually, Italian chemical industry has developed in partnership with these districts. So, for example, Montebelluna is a district specialized in sport shoes, and you use particular products, particular materials to get some performances in terms of sport, in terms of ski, for example. Okay. And the reason why it's a strategic supplier is written here, because the chemical industry creates products for any specific requirement. So there is a customization of products for any demand of these customers. Another question is, do you know any chemical company? Specifically any Italian chemical company, but also a foreign-owned one would be okay. You probably, I don't know if you have any idea, any of you have ever heard. No?
It includes petrochemical.
Yes.
Any item.
Okay. Well, let's say any. It's not petrochemicals, but it's refineries, so it's upwards. But Versalis, it's the Eni Society for Chemical Products. It actually is the largest one. But for example, you might know Mapei because it's the main sponsor of Sassuolo. You probably have heard maybe Radici, which is the sponsor of Atalanta.
You know, guys, yes or no?
Yeah. So again, the point is that you don't know any of these companies again because they don't produce things we directly use. Because they produce mainly intermediate products. So if they don't sponsor soccer, we are not aware about them. But many of these companies are actually comparable to other companies which are much more famous, like, for example, Benetton, like, for example, Barilla. These are cases where we can find in the supermarket Barilla pasta. We have a T-shirt with written Benetton. You won't find any consumer product probably with this name. Even detergents, normally they use brands which are not the name of the company. They are brands just for marketing, let's say. So this to say that in Italy we have more than 50 groups that worldwide realize a turnover of more than 500 million euros. And these are companies that have the critical mass to do research and development. Because if you are very small, you can be very specialized, like in the biotech sector, but sometimes instead you don't have the financial resources to do some disruptive technologies. So let's turn now to the second point, that is the sustainable development. What I would try to do is that, of course, we probably, or we are certainly all agree that we have to pursue sustainable development. My idea is that for many people, what is not perceived is how complex and challenging is this goal. Let's start from scientific evidence. We are facing an environmental emergency. So what the scientists say is that in 2030, for example, we would require 30% more water, 50% more food, 50% more energy. And the planet simply don't have the capability to reproduce all these resources. So we need a radical change in the economic model. What means having a radical change? It means that we have to radically change the way we produce and we consume all kinds of products. It means that we need a radical change in our everyday behavior. So it's something that calls for companies' action, but calls for everyone action as well. Here you can see the correlation between human development and ecological footprint. So until now, the correlation is negative. If we want to live better, we damage our environment. What we are trying to do, the challenge, is to get in this small area, which is called sustainable development, which means that we have to live well, but within the environmental limits. At the same time, here you can see the definition the United Nations gave of sustainable development, which is meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. So there is a very important environmental component, but it's not the only one. We have the social pillar, we have the economic pillar, and more recently we have also peace and partnership. So they are called the 5P because it's planet, people, prosperity, partnership, and peace. All these things have to be at the same time respected. So the United Nations defined 17 goals, and these are the goals to say we have achieved sustainable development. So,
puoi accettare altre persone. I saw that there are 40 people that would like to enter.
yeah.
Exactly.
Accepted.
Okay.
So here you can see you have no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, and so on. What is important is that these goals should not conflict one with each other. So, for example, when we take climate action, we have to be careful because this should not produce more poverty. And for example, in France, what happened is that they tried to higher the cost of fuel very suddenly, and there was the so-called Gilets jaunes situation, because people that were living in the countryside said, well, now from one day to the other, I won't be able to come to the city to work, to do my stuff, because I simply cannot afford this increase in costs.
In general, ok? Esatto, senza portare sulla scelta. And where is it? It's this. Okay.
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 So here you can see the so-called Green Deal. So the European Union has set very ambitious environmental targets to face the environmental emergency. Probably the most famous target is climate neutrality in 2050, but this is not the only one, because, for example, we have a zero pollution ambition, which is not about greenhouse gases emissions, but it's also all kind of emissions in water, in the air, and then we have, for example, to preserve biodiversity, to change mobility, and so on and so forth. So, the chemical industry is strategic to achieve the objectives of EU Green Deal. This is for 3 reasons. First of all, it's probably the sector affected by the largest number of legislative initiatives. So connected to the Green Deal, We have the action plan on circular economy. We have the zero pollution target, the chemical strategy for sustainability, which is about the use of substances, the farm to fork strategies, which is about the chemical products used in agriculture, and so on. The chemical industry is also a so-called hard to abate sector. So it's among sectors where it's more challenging to reduce the environmental impact. And third, it is involved in all innovative technologies to change our economic model. So you can see biotechnologies, chemical recycling, hydrogen, and so on. I will talk later on a bit about that. So the positioning of the chemical industry towards this challenge is, first of all, that it has been a long journey for the chemical industry. Here you can see the change in the environmental impact compared to 1989 for emissions. Emissions in atmosphere have been reduced by more than 90%. Emissions in water have been reduced by more than 70%. Compared to 1990, greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced by 54%. This is chemical in Italy. So, for example, we are already close to the minus 55%, which is the Green Deal goal for 2030 in terms of greenhouse gases emissions. The other point is that the chemical industry plays a role in cutting emissions in downstream uses. This is a study done by McKinsey, and with the life cycle analysis, the results were that for every ton of emissions you need to produce chemical products, you save almost 3 times emissions in downstream uses. So actually you have a net balance, which is less emissions for the system as a whole. And how this is possible, you have an example. For example, if you look at the future smart houses, but also nowadays houses, for example, we have polymer materials are used for a better insulation of buildings. So buildings are more energy efficient thanks to these products. Technical gases are used for solar panels and to have low consumption lamps. Heat reflective paints permit to maintain more stable internal temperatures, so you need less energy to maintain a good temperature. Another point is that in the EU we have very high health, safety, environmental standards, and we can consider the European regulation as the most stringent regulation worldwide. Here you can see the number of EU legislative measures that has reached 2,500 pieces of regulation. And the REACH is the regulation, the system to registrate, evaluate, authorize, and eventually restrict the use of chemical substances, which means that chemical companies have to prepare a dossier with all data on safety to submit this dossier to an independent agency. And this agency will say if this product can be used in all situation, in what kind of situation, of if its use must be restricted. So thanks to this regulation, we have in Europe the most detailed available database on the safety of chemicals. An important role to enhance health, safety, and environment is also voluntary commitment. In the chemical industry, there is a worldwide program which is called the Responsible Care Program that has been introduced over 30 years ago. Actually, it was introduced after very dramatic accidents, which were Seveso in Italy and Bhopal in India. So chemical companies understood that they had to do more. Also because otherwise you have a dramatic problem of reputation, of social acceptability. So this program, companies commit to continuous improvement. So they have to share data on a large range of variables. And this helps to anticipate and surpass regulation standards. So companies commit even stricter than regulation requires. They develop effective management models, because one thing is to say that you have a goal in terms of for example, safety. Another thing is, practically speaking, how to manage so that people don't do, for example, risky behaviors. And this program also helps spreading the best practices along the supply chain. Because when a company adopts the responsible care program, it will try also to be sure that, for example, its supplier will give high standards in terms of health, safety, and environment. Otherwise, it has some negative spillover on its reputation also as well. Okay. The other point is that the commitment of sustainability requires a very significant investment, and in particular investments in R&D, because we have to develop new technologies and products. We cannot only improve, but we really have to change. And to change, you have to develop new technological solutions. Here you can see that in Italy, for example, the number of people devoted to R&D has almost doubled in the last 10 years. And also that the share of companies investing in eco-sustainable technologies and products is more than half of all companies in the period 2015-2019. Here you can see what are, for example, the United Nations goals that can be reached thanks to chemical industry. We have already talked about health, but also for clean water. You have chemical products that are used for water purification, and this is very important, especially in developing countries, but also for the zero hunger goal. You need, for example, to have crops, to have agriculture also giving good results in adverse climate conditions. And so, for example, biotechnologies and fertilizers are important to reach this goal. Now, we can do a jump forward in terms of technological disruptions, because all these are technologies that have to be developed in the chemical industry. So I've talked about biotechnologies. There is chemicals from waste. There is, for example, hydrogen, because in Italy and everywhere today, the companies that are already producing hydrogen are essentially chemical companies or refineries. Now the point is how to obtain the so-called green hydrogen. So obtain hydrogen from green sources, renewable sources.
Sorry, definition of the biotech.
Biotech is what uses biomasses. So when we were talking about chemicals from renewable sources, this is biotechnology. For example, in our vaccines for COVID are biotechnological, have been developed using microorganisms, so this is of a biological origin. Biotech has application in the pharmaceuticals, but also in agriculture and in industry. Another very important change is the so-called circular economy. So we need to use less natural resources. One way to reduce the use of natural resources is to have a circular economic model instead of a linear economic model. And here you have a representation of the actions that make circular economy possible. Why is the chemical industry a leader? Because, first of all, it is located upstream of many supply chains. As we said, it is based on the chemical science, so its expertise, it's about the management of material flows and the use of materials and substances. And already today, 25% of the waste produced by the chemical industry is recycled. To do that, it's very important the so-called eco-design. So you have to project the products having already in mind that the model is circular. So products must be, for example, more durable. They must be easier to be repaired. They should not contain dangerous substances. And you have the recycling. Today, what we use is mechanical recycling. Another kind of recycling I will talk about is chemical recycling. And another point, yeah.
What's the difference between?
Oh, I just arrived in a moment.
Oh,
Okay. So first, what I wanted to say is that circular economy is not only a matter of technologies. Technologies are very important, but it's a completely different business model. So all company functions are involved. And this is probably the very important point, is that you have a concept of extended supply chain. So waste collectors, recyclers, consumers are part of the supply chain and must be involved to make the circularity work. Now I will try to talk about possible solution of a very complex challenge. The first point is we said that there are different components of the sustainable development. We should not neglect the economic aspects. So competitiveness. Our president of Ciampi used to say that competitiveness is a social value. Why? Because it's through competitiveness that companies create prosperity. If companies are not competitive, we will have rising unemployment. We will have relocation, so companies move in areas that have lower standards in terms of environment. And at the end, what we do is we use products that are imported from areas that are polluting. So we have not solved the environmental problem, but we have created a social problem. And here you can see how, until now, the chemical industry has tried to get a virtuous cycle between economic growth, well-being, and environmental protection. Performance have been better than manufacturing average for all three dimensions, and the key is technological innovation, because it's technological innovation that makes you competitive, that people are productive so can be paid, and solution can be found to protect the environment and not to sacrifice the well-being. Now, in Italy, we have the Italian Recovery and Resilience Plan. This is probably an unprecedented opportunity to make a jump forward for our economic system. This is the most ambitious plan in the EU, more than 200 million euros, which is more than double, for example, the amount of Spain. For the chemical industry, 4 billion euros will be directed to chemical recycling and hydrogen. The chemical sector also enters in several areas because, for example, you have probably heard about the super bonus for energy efficiency of buildings. We said that many of these solutions are made of chemical products. However, there is not a full recognition of the strategic role of the chemical industry. There is not a chemical industry chapter. You have some measures here and there. We are talking about the most relevant initiative of industrial policy, probably in Italian history. And as I said, the aim is to radically change our economic model. So what's very important is that benefits should be widespread, not projects only with a winner-takes-all risk. Otherwise, we will have social impact very negative. So how to avoid this winner-takes-all risk? We need some specific projects on very promising technologies, but at the same time, we need horizontal initiatives. So initiatives that can have an impact on many companies. We need supply chain projects. So typically, a technological leader that has a project that involved many suppliers, many SMEs, for example. Here you can see that in Italy, SMEs are very important in all sectors, and also in the chemical industry, where the average size of companies is larger, you still have almost 40% of production that is made by small companies. So the principle of the European Commission is also to have specific instruments to leave no one behind. So there is the so-called Just Transition Fund of 90 billion euros. Probably it will not be sufficient, so there must be some measures at national level as well. So let's turn to what are two specific issues of the chemical industry when talking about environmental challenge. One is that of plastics, and the other one is energy. So, plastics. We have been hearing a lot of plastic-free initiatives. So, let's abolish the use of plastics to get environmental protection. The plastic packaging, being as itself an enemy of the environment, is simply a fake news because it actually avoids a lot of food waste. So plastic packaging is used for the conservation, the preservation of food. Here we have quantified, actually the German association, the emissions that you have to produce a plastic packaging and the emission you would have from food waste without plastic packaging. So the very point, the real problem is plastic waste. So we have to manage plastic waste to get full circularity. And here we come back to the chemical recycling. So this is the situation today. Today in Italy, we have the collection of domestic waste, what we all as good citizens do. This domestic waste is mechanically recycled. But not all plastic waste we collect can be recycled mechanically. Because, for example, if you have a mixture of different types of plastics, you cannot recycle it. Then the orange part is the other way. We have landfill. Of course, this is the worst result in terms of environmental impact. And then we have the waste to energy. So we use waste to get energy. Chemical recycling represents a complementary technology to mechanical recycling because chemical recycling means you get the plastic waste and you can go back to the original plastic polymers. You divide it and you really get a polymer which is exactly at the so-called virgin polymer. Okay? So this means that with the chemical recycling, we can treat what we cannot treat with the mechanical recycling. And it also means that in terms of quality, we get something that has standards which are much higher. So what we use now can be used for some application, but not for others. For example, we cannot use for medical devices or for food the plastics which is mechanically recycled because it doesn't have the standards in terms of safety that we need. Through chemical recycling, instead, we come back to the original polymer, to the virgin polymer, and we can transform it in a plastic which has these high standards. So this should permit to have an intermediate step with some waste to energy, and the arrival point is full circularity. No landfill, no waste to energy. Consider that this is a technology that is in the pilot phase. So we have also in Italy the first plants that are pilot, which means that they are small and they are to test if it works. So it will probably need 5 to 10 years to get there. We have to invest now but the solution will not be practicable tomorrow. Okay? So to sum up, an effective policy for plastics, we think that the plastic tax to cure is not a good solution because it discriminates against a material without any evidence-based analysis of being a plastics really worse than other materials. For example, paper. Paper, it's good because it's very recyclable, but to obtain paper, you use a lot of water. So there must be a calculation to say, in this case, paper is better. In this case, plastics is better. The other point is that a plastic tax is very difficult to apply to imports because it's very difficult from a product to really understand how much of a recycled product there is inside. So, for example, there are cases of imports from China saying that 25% of material is recycled, but there's no control about it. So, if it's so, at the end, you have only a competitive disadvantage and you don't have a benefit in terms of environment. So the solution is to invest in technology and infrastructure, invest in the so-called extended producer responsibility, which means that there is a consortium that collects plastic packaging. It works. In Italy, it has good results compared to other EU countries. We need to have these consortia for other type of plastics with a use which is not packaging. In, I don't know, in home appliances, cars, toys, and so on. We need education. If people don't collect plastic waste, we will not get to the result. And chemical recycling is a solution to reach the circular economy. A very important point is that public funding, as I said, there's something in the national plan. But another very important point is to speed up the authorization procedures for new plants. Companies are now rushing to invest in chemical recycling, are deciding where to make this investment. If in Italy we take 2 years to give an authorization, we will lose an opportunity just because of that. The other point is energy. So here the case is of a hard-to-abate sector, which means that we don't have a single solution to reduce CO2 emissions in this sector. We need a set of levers, all of them. We should not fall in love without one single solution because we don't know what will be the winning technologies for all single application. There will be cases in which the electrification works, cases in which we will have to store and use CO2, cases in which we only can improve energy efficiency, and so on. And here, there is a very important principle guiding industrial policies, which is the so-called principle of neutrality, technological neutrality. So, policies should say, this is the goal, we want to arrive there. But not necessarily public authorities know which are the technologies to get there. It's the markets and the companies that know and has the expertise to develop the technologies. In any case, we are talking about 10 billion euros of R&D investments in Italy to develop such solutions. And another very important point is to understand that we can replace fossil fuels in terms of energy sources, but on the basis of current scientific knowledge, not current technologies, even knowledge, there is no possibility to completely replace fossil fuels as raw materials. Here you can see, I don't know if you know about the carbon price in Europe. Europe has a system which is the European trading scheme that gives a price to carbon emissions for energy and for energy intensive sectors. Now, what is happening is that European Union has set with the Green Deal much more ambitious targets, and also with some financial speculation, because financial operators know that this price is going to go up, no possibility for it to go down. So they are investing to get cash back. And so in one single year, we have more than double this price. Of course, it's the right direction. Environmental challenge means that until now, the costs of environmental damage were not incorporated in the prices paid for products. When we paid for a plastic, this price was not comprising the environmental impact. So we will have to pay more. But the point is the speed. So if the price suddenly doubles or triples, it creates in the market some turbulence, and for the people as well. And that's what is happening for energy prices as well, because renewables are not stable. This year there was not much wind. Natural gas, no one is investing because it's considered not a green source. And so now suddenly we don't have energy and we will pay a lot for it. So it's very important to find in the transition a path not to create shocks, very violent shocks. And for Italy, the other point is that here you can see the so-called indirect cost compensation, which means that in Germany, a company that uses a lot of energy receives more than 200 millions to compensate for the fact that their energy costs higher because of the carbon cost price. In Italy, this compensation is zero. So we are talking about the single European markets, but this is not a single market if we have this distortion in the competitiveness, even of EU partners. So there must be some harmonization at European level for energy issues.
So,
Chiudo.
No. But I think that it should be interesting to have some questions, because you presented some theses that I don't know if they are familiar or if they agree with. So no plastic tax. So no, it's important. So you can discuss. Because, for example, before knowing your presentation or other companies, I didn't know about this framework. So if you have some questions, because usually we know when we speak to each other, we think that the plastic is only bad. Plastic is not so good, according to me, but because we can see around the sea, but the problem is to have a circular economy. So then you have to, have you got some questions about that, yes or no? Because otherwise it's not useful for you. So the guest is here for you. in order to intervene, to have some discussion. So I think that we could think something like, okay.
You were talking about the compensation in other European countries. Is this related to why most of the energy we use here in Italy, especially in the south, is exported since they're produced domestically? Does it have anything to do with that, or is that something else?
So this is a government decision. So the government decision was to use with these emissions permits, states have some revenues. So you have to decide how to use these revenues. Until now, Italian government decided to use these revenues partly, for example, to reduce a bit our public deficit. Now, for example, the EU Commission proposal says, no, these revenues must be used for climate action. We are doing all these mechanisms to fight the climate change, so use these resources to help this fight. So, for example, part of these revenues could be used for poorest people just to afford a higher energy price. This could be a use. But a part of them, if we decide that there is an indirect cost compensation, and this is why the reason is, I'm a chemical company, it's not me that decides if the energy source is nuclear, is renewable, or so on and so forth. So I won't pay the cost of that, okay? So this is the indirect cost compensation, and the other reason is the so-called carbon leakage. Carbon leakage means if I'm Europe and products made in Europe must pay a carbon cost, but products from somewhere else don't pay this carbon cost, I have a competitive disadvantage. If at the end I destroy local production and I import products, these products we have an embedded CO2 emissions that are what I avoided in Europe, or even worse if their efficiency is lower.
Questions, guys? Only Alina? No? Your name?
Kayla.
Kayla, okay. Get to
Okay.
Kayla. So at the end of the class, guys,
I hope at least you have understood that it's not a simple problem. It's not something that you can, for us as consumers, today the risk is that we want to do something more friendly for the environment, but we risk to do something that's useless or even damaging. That's also why we need to have more evidence-based decision. We need to have more clear definitions to avoid the so-called greenwashing. So companies that just something that sounds good, they use it to sell more, but it doesn't have really benefits for the environment. So for example, we have been talking about CO2 labeling. It would be a nice thing that you buy something and you say, okay, this foam required these emissions to be produced. And this is something that requires traceability, and for that, for example, all the digitalization can be a solution to create a sort of passport for products to know how they are produced, what is the impact on the whole. So only 1 point, and that's all. 2 points, let's say. One is that, to sum up, in terms of policies, we have at the same time to facilitate the transformation, so to strengthen investments. And to do so, we have to give a stable and a consistent regulation to companies, because they have to invest a lot of money to develop new technologies. They have to be able to price the risk and the return of their investments. The other point is to avoid unnecessarily penalizing attitudes. We are in the transition phase. One thing is where we want to arrive. One thing is how to get there. So it's very important that if an innovation is not ready yet, we have to do everything to speed up the investment to get there. But we cannot say from today, oil is bad, because we have not a substitute of it. So what is today in all newspapers, which is the problem with the gas prices, is also because, as I said before, if we create a push that says, don't invest in these sources, they are bad for environment, but we have not alternative technologies yet, we are going to create a supply side shock and a price shock. And the other point is that the companies that are developing the new products are the companies that produce the traditional ones. So they sell the traditional products and they use the profits to invest in research. If you say that today producing a plastic is bad, we will not have bioplastics, we will not have chemical recycling and so on, because they will not have the profitability to invest it. So, and finally, keep in mind these numbers. As Europe, we have very ambitious targets, but we are 8% of worldwide CO2 emissions. So we need also the other areas to participate to the challenge. Italy is 1% of worldwide CO2 emissions. It's very important Italy participate to it. It's our responsibility. It's a possibility to push innovation, to become more dynamic. But we are still the 1% of the problem. So if the other 99% doesn't go in the same direction, we will not reach this goal. That's it. Thank you.
I think that is very interesting. I am surprised that
Maybe for the people.
I don't know if okay. Stay here. Okay, so I think that is very interesting. I am a little bit surprised that you don't intervene, because this is the point of view of the chemical industry. So I imagine that you could have a different point of view, or do you agree with that? What do you think? You don't think? Oh, this is not nice. I think that you should have some idea. Have you got some idea? Yes or not, guys? Complete silence. So I appreciate if you intervene. So I think that you will have some idea. Before this lecture, your which was your point of view?
Have you changed mind or not? Keira, we wait a moment. Otherwise, because I am very happy about Keira, but I think that in this class we don't have only Keira. So, have you got other ideas, guys? Yes or no?
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about it? For example,
Exactly.
you are the generation they're going to have this challenge in your everyday work once you will get into a job.
What do you think?
I'm really optimistic because you say that for the knowledge we have, we are not able to substitute raw materials for the knowledge, and not only that. I didn't know that.
Yes, this is true for the chemical industry.
Yeah.
But the energy use of the oil is a large part. So if we can find an alternative in this part, it's already a good contribution to get there.
So I don't know if they can see your name. Giacomo said us that he is not so optimistic, but other guys in the.
What do you think about the nuclear power?
Nuclear
power. What do you
Oh,
think
okay. So here we have a new question by Loris, repeat it because I don't know if they can listen.
The question is about nuclear power. Well, first of all, I'm not a technician. As one of the points of my, let's say, lecture was, if you don't have the knowledge, just keep silent. So I really don't know all the elements to give you an answer. The thing is, first of all, Italy made a referendum to not to have the nuclear. This was a bit inconsistent because if we buy nuclear from France that is here, the problem of nuclear is safety. So if the problem is safety and we buy nuclear from France,
Sorry.
there is still a problem.
Do you agree with Cingolani? You have to study the problem and not really have a solution on it.
This is, I think that in principle, it's important not to have a prejudice, but try to have really information to make a choice based on evidence, on what you know. But another thing, the role of politicians is also to consider our priorities. So if we decide that we want nuclear, we do not want nuclear power, for me it's okay. But then you have to get to be consistent. So it's why don't you want nuclear power? Because it's a problem of safety. Then solve the problem of safety. You cannot buy it from there that if something happens, it's exactly the same. The other point is, for example, in Italy, another decision, for example, from the movement of 5 stars, it's that they don't want the waste to energy. Okay? There are other countries in Europe that do a lot of waste to energy as a solution to get circularity. Okay? For me, the choice is fine. You want it, you don't want it. Fine. But then you have to find a solution, an alternative solution. So when we had to talk to Cingolani about chemical recycling, we said, okay, chemical recycling, chemical already makes you upset, okay? We explain you what is it. You can call it molecular recycle. Maybe it's less upsetting, okay? But one thing you have to know, if you don't want to do waste to energy, You have to develop chemical recycling. Otherwise, at the end, we will have landfill, which is worse. So what is important is everyone has these ideas, priorities, but then we have to be consistent to reach the goal.
Okay, guys, I think that it's okay. So probably if they have some question, could write you or they write me. I will send you your email. So we are very happy about our guest. We learn a lot of things. So we thank another time, and we see tomorrow for the welcome day. Okay, 12:30. Okay, see you. Bye bye, guys.